just to say as well, we're hoping to record this session. So again, if you want to be in there, just this is your warning. As then we're hoping to plug this into perhaps our YouTube channel, and potentially we can extract the audio and just make it a bit of a audio file as well. So we got dance, we got runners, we got researchers, professors. Oh, somebody trained as a PSA instructor. Very, very interested in that. Excellent. Bronwyn, I don't know how long is okay to wait for people that have signed up and haven't turned up yet. Already gone 9:06.
Yeah, we'll kick off now if that's okay, please, Lorraine.
You recording? Am I happy for that?
Yeah, I've got it, but I've got it so it's only the person speaking that will feature in the recording. So I guess when we do get to the Q&A, just bear in mind if you don't want to feature on the recording, please could we just ask that you turn your cameras off? Then that'll make it a little bit easier.
Because hopefully whoever speaks, then it will appear on that video recording. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so again, if you're camera shy and you don't want to appear on your face in there, but you have any questions, you can obviously turn the camera off and ask the question just by voice. Excellent. So good morning, everybody. We are here to celebrate, as this is the 1st of October 2020, the Oldest People's Day. My name is Lorraine Robe, and I am the project manager for adult participation programs in active Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And this is one of the webinars that we have organized for today. We have other things going on later on in the afternoon that I'm also leading with our ICOP colleagues as well. So I am joined today by Jenna Wood. Hello, Jenna.
Hi. So I'm a second year PhD student with my research mainly being focused on falls prevention services and biomechanical fall risk factors for older adults. And I'm also an exercise professional for the National Exercise Referral Scheme in Newport, South Wales as well.
Brilliant. And so today we're going to discuss a little bit what the physical activity guidelines for older adults. So we're looking into maybe encouraging people that perhaps are willing to go into this demographic to maybe think about some considerations to have before you launch your class or your product or something like that. We're going to talk about the benefits of exercise in adults, how to engage other adults. As you know, we obviously in a pandemic situation, we've always have gone into this virtual type of setup. If it was normal days, I would say we would probably be in a room having a coffee and a biscuit and having a discussion as well. So obviously all that has changed. And again, maybe some other considerations for COVID environments and some top tips. So I think, Jenna, a good starting point perhaps will be to discuss those Chief Medical Officers or CMO guidelines for physical activity for older adults. What do you think?
Yeah, so the CMO's report this year that came out gives you some recommended activities and the recommended guidelines for exercise with older adults. So they firstly want to aim the exercise at improving or maintaining strength, balance and flexibility on 2 days a week for those who are age 65 plus. So that's kind of like their main focus first of all, within the guidelines, the way that they've written them out.
Okay. Jenna, sorry, so when we said about strength-based exercise, like what type of exercises do they mean in there?
So generally when we tend to think of strength training, you would think high weight, low reps, and they tend to be determined by something like 1 rep max testing. But when we're looking at strength training within the older adults kind of population, we tend to see it from more of a functional perspective. So for example, we look at training large muscle groups. So for example, the lower limbs and being able to perform everyday movements such as standing out of a chair or walking upstairs, because obviously the stronger an individual is, the longer they'll be able to stay independent for. So with regards to the strength exercise itself, we tend to work more towards what we see as hypertrophy guidelines. So 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps of each exercise, obviously mainly focusing on those large muscle groups.
Okay.
So as well as the strength balance and flexibility exercise, the CMO obviously also recommends, you can see on the screen, 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity or 75 minutes of vigorous activity if they're already kind of regularly active.
Okay, and for those 150 minutes, like, you know, how do we pitch that as to, like, do they have to wear a watch and, you know, calculate some heart rate and beats and things like that, or is there an easier way to establish that?
So I suppose 150 minutes, when you say it in total, it sounds like quite a lot, but throughout the week that tends to work out as kind of 30 minutes a day for 5 days. And it's quite difficult to describe how to pitch them for each individual, because it is going to be relative to the individual. But I suppose if we look at the 2 intensities that they recommend, so first of all, you've got your moderate intensity exercise, and scientifically speaking, moderate intensity exercise looks at burning 3 to 6 times the amount of calories that you would at rest. So you'd be working at 3 to 6 METs. But in real life terms, we can measure it using other tools. So for example, you've got things such as the Borg breathlessness scale. That's quite a good one to work off. It's a 0 to 10 scale, and we would tend to see a rating of 3 as being classed as moderate within that scale. An even easier way of measuring it in terms of moderate intensity would be using your talk test. So the person exercising should be able to hold a conversation while they're performing their exercise or their activity. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the older population, obviously, like I said, it's quite difficult to determine specific exercises that would be classed as moderate intensity. But what we would generally see is something like walking or a gentle cycle, or gentle housework in terms of daily activity. So dusting, polishing, cleaning windows, or if you're gardening, things like weeding, planting flowers. So it's all nice and gentle, kind of very functional movements. But then I suppose you've got the other side of the coin. So for those people who are already regularly active, if you want to, you can go for the 75 minutes of vigorous activity. And again, you can split that up on a daily basis. You don't have to do 75 minutes of vigorous activity all in one session, because that is an intense, that's an intense exercise workout. So in terms of your vigorous intensity, we look at that scientifically as being 6 or more times the calories that you would burn just at rest. So that's working at 6 METs. But then when we look at it again in real world terms, and we take it back to that Borg breathlessness scale, it would be a rating of kind of 4 onwards. And when we look at that more functional talk test, it would probably be the individuals trying to still hold this conversation, but having to take a breath between words, kind of every other word or every couple of words. So we see a significant rise in the heart rate and breathing rate as the person starts to move. And again, this is just generally speaking, but if we start to talk of the type of exercise that we see for older adults within this range, it would generally be seen as things like brisk walking, an inclined walk, fast cycling or incline cycling, something like rowing, possibly jogging, or using a cross trainer. And then activities around the home that could be counted as kind of vigorous would be like heavy gardening, so digging, things like hoovering around the home, and like heavy DIY as well. But what is important to note, as I've kind of tried to emphasize within that, is that it's very individualized. So everybody's different, and those descriptions don't always apply to everyone over the age of 65. So for example, someone might have been active for their entire life, and for them to go on a gentle walk, it might not even feel like moderate activity. Whereas for someone with a chronic condition over the age of 65, going for a gentle walk might feel like vigorous activity. So it is very specific to the individual. So you need to know your clients, get to know your clients before you start trying to prescribe specific activities to fit in with those guidelines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just I'm aware that we probably use loads of acronyms and things like that. So we mentioned some METs. So what does MET mean, for example?
So that's metabolic equivalent, very sciencey term. It's basically just kind of the rate at which your body uses up energy, like simply put. But we don't, like I said, I tend to, that's kind of more scientifically speaking. Personally, when I'm delivering exercise, especially to older adults, I wouldn't be telling them how many METs they're probably using. I would be looking more at, how do you feel on a scale of 0 to 10, and let them rate it themselves. Or again, start a conversation with them, and you will know within minutes whether they're working in that moderate or vigorous intensity, as to whether they can hold that conversation with you or not.
Oh, that's great. And so why is it like they advise us to have these type of like exercise guidelines? Why they need it?
So as most people know, a physical decline is kind of observed as we age, but the decline that we see is often just accepted as old age, when in reality a lot of it's preventable. So that's kind of where that treatment or prevention comes into it. So as you were saying the other day, Loretta, one of your colleagues says that it's kind of really a question of, do you stop exercising because you're getting old, or do you get old because you've stopped exercising? So naturally with age, we see a decline in biomechanical function, and it's often caused by kind of this reduced capacity to maintain your strength and balance. So while your aerobic activity, so that 150 minutes, is needed to help keep healthy function of organs, your heart, and to avoid things like acute and chronic conditions, it could be argued really that strength and balance are even more important to be able to kind of focus on that everyday function and make that maintain your independence for longer.
Again, we're going into this technical knowledge of biomechanical function, and maybe those big words that we're like, okay, can we put it into like everyday language? Like, what do you mean by that?
So biomechanics as a whole, so that's kind of where my research is focused, is the science of movement of a body. So in this case, it would be the science of the way that the human body moves, and how the muscles, the bones, the tendons all work together to create that movement. So when we look at this decline in biomechanical function or physical function, I would personally see it as the way that these physiological and sometimes psychological deteriorations or declines that we see as we get older are negatively affecting the way that the individual is able to move about in everyday life. So, i.e., the way that your body might be kind of declining a little bit with age is starting to affect the way that you can do everyday movements, like get out of a chair or walk up the stairs or go for the walk to the shop around the corner. You might start to notice it starts to get a little bit harder as you get older if we're not starting to meet those exercise guidelines and not keeping the body moving as much.
Okay, so that's actually quite linked, and I'm going to take the opportunity to plug our next webinar at 3:30, but that actually quite linked to the ICOP presentation we will hear later on in the afternoon about the different points of decline that you can have as you get older, and how to maybe, as you say, instead of consider like to treat them, how we can prevent them to go any further than that. Okay, so these guidelines are for what age onwards? Is it 64?
So it's 65 that they're aimed at onwards. So generally the guidelines are split between adults and older adults. So adults would be age 19 to 64 and older adults seen as 65 plus. But when you actually look at the guidelines themselves, they're exactly the same for both groups. Older adults and adults in general are both recommended to do that 150 minutes of moderate activity or 75 of vigorous, and they're both asked to do 2 lots of strength or balance flexibility training per week as well. But what you kind of see between the difference between the two groups is more the tone in which they pitch the guidelines. So am I able to share my screen? I don't know if I am on here.
I don't know, Bronwyn. Do you have a particular example from the report, or?
So if I just get it up on my screen. So it's kind of more looking at the language that they use. So for example, when we look at the just general adults guidelines, and I'll post a link for them afterwards if possible, so you can just go and check them out. But the language that they use in the general adult population is kind of, any activity is better than none, you should be doing this, this is recommended. Whereas when we get to the older adults or 65 years and older, they tend to kind of like fluff it up a little bit more. So it tends to be from more of a health benefit perspective, which is good, and that's kind of the way that we need to be pitching it. But they are exactly the same guidelines when you read into it. So the way that they pitch it for the older adults is to kind of look at good physical function, mental health, well-being, social functioning, whereas they don't really mention any of that when it comes to the general adult population. And as well as that, kind of relating back to what I said about the individualized nature of the exercise, when we look at moderate and vigorous intensity activity, when you look at the general adult population, they actually recommend things like brisk walking, cycling as moderate activity, and they recommend things like running as vigorous activity for the adults. But when it comes to older adults, they don't specifically name these exercises. They just say that weight-bearing activities what did they say,
Okay.
would create impacts to maintain bone health. So it's kind of very generalized, but more focused on those health benefits that we would see.
So you probably, because of the population is more, a little bit more individualized, so they just don't want to name the actual activity because it could mean different things to different people because of the previous experience, perhaps?
Yeah, 100%. Because obviously, like I said, everyone kind of sees this natural decline with age, but people decline at different rates, and it might be that you've been physically active your whole life, so you decline at a slower rate. So if they were to tell you that you're meant to be going on a gentle walk for 30 minutes a day, then that might not be enough for you. You might be used to going on a brisk walk or a run or whatever it is that you're doing. So I think they kind of hold back on giving more specific advice, especially when it comes to more specialized populations.
Okay. So we talked quite a bit about, let's say, the physiological functions and benefits, like, you know, your lung system, your cardiac system, etc. But are there any benefits that exercise actually brings to older adults?
Yeah, so there's obviously like a plethora of other benefits that they can have, and I'll go through a couple. So the biggest one for me would be the psychosocial benefits that we can see. So loneliness is a big topic within the older population, especially at the moment, with a lot of people having to have shielded over the last couple of months. So the opportunity that exercise poses for these social benefits are of really high importance, really, because you get the opportunity, especially if you're going to a specific session designed for older adults, you've got the opportunity to go and meet others who have been in a similar situation to you, who might be experiencing the same issues, who have got the same kind of situations. And it kind of provides that opportunity to build up those new friendships and overcome that loneliness. And as much as like like I said, a lot of older people might have been shielding over the last couple of months, and people might have been doing that alone, or they might have been doing it with families, husbands, wives, partners, whatever. But at the end of the day, you've still been isolated within your own little bubble for a very long time. So when they're able to, if bringing back that kind of social element to exercise, I think it's a really, really high importance, and it's a big benefit for older adults. So as well as that, being part of some form of structured exercise program, it can kind of help maintain that routine. Obviously, we all know we've probably all been at home a lot more than we're used to over the last 6 months or so. And it's really easy to fall out of a routine when you're spending a lot of time at home. But having that kind of set exercise to do in the middle of the day, or knowing that you need to go somewhere to perform that set exercise, it can help maintain that routine. And as part of that, it can help with sleep as well. So bringing in that kind of that sleep element, it helps with the routine. And personally, from experience where I've worked with quite a few older adults, like I know that there's a lot of people who have said that their sleep has definitely been improved since they started exercising. We tend to find as you fall out of a routine, as you make yourself less busy within the day, sleep often becomes a bit of a problem. So as we start to get into that routine, that can also improve as well. And then obviously another big benefit is within mental health. So mental health is obviously going to be positively impacted with exercise, and there's so much research that goes into this. And it's not only from a depression and anxiety perspective, which in themselves are a huge topic to talk about in terms of exercise, but when we look at the older population, it's also in terms of cognitive function as well. So there's been research, there's been reviews. So there's a review, and again, I'll try and post the link in case anyone wants to have a look, but that was by Sang et al., if I've said that right, sorry, that identifies the benefits and kind of highlights the ability of exercise to help maintain and improve cognitive function in those older adults who might already have some form of cognitive impairment. So when we look at exercise in general, it doesn't just have those physiological benefits, but it also has those kind of psychosocial benefits that when they all work together as one, we end up kind of aiming to improve on the individual's quality of life, which is kind of the biggest thing, really. That the more independent you are and the higher the quality of life that you have, the more enjoyable things are.
Yeah, so very interesting that perhaps when you're designing different programs or classes, that you may go to these guidelines and maybe focus of these minutes or this strength or this type of activities, but actually all these days going in the periphery of all that, you know, the environment to allow them to interact with different people. And we know from the programs that we run as well, like, you know, that coffee and biscuit afterwards is probably for them more interesting than the actual class bit, which doesn't take it away that the class content has to be of quality and based on research and something beneficial for the physical health. But it's almost like we have some byproducts which are all this like psychosocial and mental health benefits as well, that perhaps we don't plan from that perspective as much. We just hope to achieve that effect somehow. But interesting about the routine, interested about the sleep, that maybe we don't talk too much about that, but obviously considerations to have. Now, when we are thinking of launching a new group or maybe venturing into this target population group, how would you promote like these exercise sessions for older adults?
So obviously the guidelines are important, but personally from like experience, I would go about focusing on the health and social benefits, because that's where I've kind of seen people kind of excel the most. And it tends to be what draws people in as well. So to focus on all of those other benefits as well that we've just talked about would be great. So like from my personal experience, I run a pulmonary class within Newport, and I know that when I started pitching that class, uptake was very, very low, because I was pitching it from mainly kind of the health, the physiological point of view of the exercise will help you. You turn up, you exercise, it helps, you go home. Soon learned that wasn't working, and I was only getting 2 or 3 participants. So I added in kind of almost like a coffee morning afterwards. So they'd come, they do the exercise, and then we all go into the cafe afterwards and we all sit there and have a coffee. And although it isn't overly possible at the moment, and we'll go on to that later, that having that added benefit, it drew in so many more participants to the point where the class was then maxed out. So really focusing on those social benefits and the general health benefits that we can see, rather than the specific guidelines, the specific physiological changes that people can have. And I would just really, really avoid, I mean, it probably goes without saying, but I'd avoid pitching it in a way that other mainstream classes are pitched or programs are pitched. So for example, from an aesthetic point of view, you've got things like legs, bums and tums within mainstream. You wouldn't want to pitch an older adults class from that perspective. And the same when it comes to kind of intensity related as well. That you're not going to pitch a class for older adults in terms of boot camp, come and shred yourself. Like it doesn't work in that way. We want to look at it from that kind of social and health kind of benefit point of view.
Yeah, and I guess when you promote those sessions as well, the imagery that you use for the posters or leaflets, etc., again, has to reflect a little bit the population you're talking to. There's no point of having somebody completely shredded on top of that, because they may not be identified with that and definitely think, well, that is not for me. Well, how can we think from their perspective about portraying that this is for your health, or for meeting new people, or maybe thinking about other benefits that we just mentioned. So what can we do? Obviously, as you say, coffee mornings type of activities, we are very, very limited to that. And as things go, I know in Cardiff, for example, you have another local lockdown at the moment. How would you say like we can deliver this for older adults if we have all these restrictions that can come in at any time?
Yeah, so obviously, like you said, like at the moment where I am in South Wales, like we're in pretty much everyone's in local lockdown here at the moment, so we are starting to see these issues come in again. So at the moment, things like gyms and leisure centres, they're allowed to stay open, and older adults are able to attend the gym and some of their regular classes, but we are seeing a large proportion that are either still shielding, or they're just choosing not to come to face-to-face sessions, which is completely understandable, because I wouldn't want to either. So there are kind of other alternatives that we can go down. We've got the virtual route and we've got other routes as well. So I'll just kind of brief overview of kind of what I would personally do and what we're doing at the moment, and hopefully that might be able to give some help to some people. So within the National Exercise Referral Scheme in Newport, we've got quite a lot of regular clients that we work with, people that we've worked with for quite a few years. So at the start of lockdown, what we did was we rang everyone up and kind of got an indication of how tech savvy they were. Found out that quite a few were fairly tech savvy, so we kind of had a look at the options for virtual delivery, but because of some of the restrictions and everything that we've had, we haven't been able to set it up properly. So we've gone down one route that I'll cover in a second. But when you look at virtual delivery, you've got mainly 2 options. So you've got things like pre-recorded videos that you could put on YouTube or wherever. and you've got live classes. And there's obviously pros and cons to both. So the pre-recorded videos, they're really good as from an instructor point of view, because it gives you time to kind of sit back, think about what it is that you want to say. You might perform the exercise and put a voiceover afterwards explaining the technique, or it gives you time to edit the videos and make sure that you put in all of those technique points and all of the kind of safety points that you feel is necessary for the clientele that you're working with. But then the cons when it comes to pre-recorded videos, obviously, is that as much as you can advise that this exercise is for a certain population, you don't actually know who's going to be using them. So it's not overly, as much as you've protected yourself from the point of view of saying, right, this is aimed at older adults, that covers a really wide range of people. So it's not, you don't know who's going to be doing it, you don't know what environment they're doing it in as well. So then the other option is the live classes. And live classes have obviously got a few different options of virtual deliveries through different sites. So first, if we have a look at social networking sites, so like Facebook and Instagram, which many older people won't have accounts with. So that is one issue that you come into contact with straight away. What we found personally within NERS in Newport is that quite a few of our regulars did have Facebook, or those that didn't were more than happy to kind of set up an account, because that was the quickest way that we could just get onto it and just get it done. And at the moment, they're in the process of trying to deliver it in kind of a more professional way through the NHS anyway. But like I said, we started trying to gauge where our audience were in terms of these live classes and how interested they would be. So we are still running some live classes on Facebook weekly. And to be honest, as much as you've got the cons of not being able to see the person behind the camera, so you can't see the environment that they're working with, you can't see the technique that they're using, and ultimately you're not there with the individual, so it's not as individualized. It does pose the pros as well. So the pros to it are mainly for us the social side. We find that it has added in that social element, which is quite a big thing with us. So as much as these participants can't see each other and they can only see me, I can't see them, they're talking in the comments all the way through the session. They're messaging each other, they're kind of catching up afterwards through the comments, and it's giving people that point of contact. So whether they're on their own or they're living with husbands, wives, partners, or their family, it's given them that point of contact with that kind of familiar environment that they were with beforehand. As an instructor, one of the things that we've kind of noted, obviously, is that there is that heightened risk of injury. There is kind of that risk with the instructor as well. But as long as you're kind of really slowly going through all of that technique, all of the form that is needed, and making sure that they're doing everything safely and giving as many options as you can for regressions, progressions, then we've kind of taken the approach that doing something is better than nothing. So as well as social networking, which doesn't always work, you've got other options for live delivery. So you've got streaming sites, so Zoom, for example, or if you're based in the NHS, you've got things like AccuRx or Attend Anywhere. And the biggest pro for that is that if the participant has the camera on, obviously you're able to see them, you're able to see the environment that they're in, you're able to see their technique, ensure that they're performing the exercises safely. So you get that, first of all, physiological benefit by doing it through that kind of live streaming site. But the other option then is that you get the social benefit as well, because they're able to see the instructor, you're able to have a conversation pretty much face to face. And so, for example, one of our instructors on our scheme, she runs a Zoom class every week. The class itself runs for half an hour, and then she leaves the last 10 minutes at the end for them all to sit down and have a catch up. So it adds in that social element, and I think that's something that's really important. And she's getting quite high numbers on that class, and I think it's purely because she's added in that social element, and they can all have that kind of catch up, see how each other are doing, that type of thing as well. But I think kind of what I've touched on there is, in order to promote this virtual side of things, because for a lot of older adults, taking that step into the virtual world is quite big, and just having the benefits, the physiological benefits of exercise are probably not going to be enough. You need those added benefits of the social element if you can get them where possible. So I think it's important to aim for that. But obviously, the biggest con to virtual delivery, especially to the older adult population, is that, well, the inevitability that most older adults may not have access to some form of technology, or they might not possess the skills to use it. Obviously, like I've said, quite a lot that we've worked with have ended up being really tech savvy, and that's been great, but there are always going to be people that slip through the net. So we need to make sure that we don't create that kind of even bigger divide, that inequality between those who have the equipment or are able to use the equipment and those who have access and are able to use it really well. So what I would personally recommend, and what we've been trying to do on the scheme where we can, is either send in, so we can send in sheets of home exercises, so just a sheet of exercises to the participants or patient's home. And then we've been doing kind of either weekly, fortnightly, or 3-week check-in. So give the patient or the participant a phone call, catch up to see how they're doing on the exercises, if there's anything they're struggling with. But then you also give them that kind of 10-15 minutes of that social side of things as well, because if they are isolating on their own, then yes, they might not be able to see the other participants in the class, they might not be able to speak to the other participants in the class, but you're still a familiar face. And if they have that point of contact with you for 10 minutes a week, then that, again, that's better than nothing for them.
Yeah, so I think as everybody, when we went into lockdown, we just went virtual meeting craziness, that it was one after the other, almost like feeling like a marathon. And actually talking to a camera, it does, well, for me at least, it fatigues you quite a bit. It's a lot of effort, because I think there's something that our brain doesn't get about this is a social interaction, but it doesn't feel like a social interaction as such, because sometimes, you know, it's difficult when to interrupt somebody or read body language, etc. And then particularly thinking of this demographic, something that is really useful for us to download an application and make an account and then sign up to X, Y, and Z. That's where perhaps this older population we're struggling with. And most of the time when you cannot meet face to face, you said, oh, we'll do it virtually. But then you find the barrier of the population not being able to meet you that way. And you know, it's great to see that you've been checking in with the participants on a weekly or fortnightly basis, because that was one of the alternatives that we set in our fall prevention program, which I think we have a couple of instructors in the audience today, that is about like bringing them and having that conversation. And you know, we had really, really positive feedback from the participants, appreciative of the phone calls and the time that our instructors had spent talking to them. And you know, we did check obviously about the exercise, but we also check about the other bits and bobs, and whether we have to highlight any issues that they may have, or any difficulties about getting food and medication perhaps at the beginning. As the lockdown measures like eased off a little bit, and they could see more people, or they will be more confident to go out, then you can also feel a little bit like, oh, you know, don't call me every week, maybe every 2 weeks, just check, etc. Which is a great sign for us, because we know that they are getting that social interaction from somewhere else. And again, those exercise sheets that you said about, that you send them, and good example, good resource to send them. The danger is you don't know how they perform them. You know, it's almost like you give them a piece of paper, and in our case we give them a TheraBand, one of the elastic resistant bands, and off you go. Hopefully you will know you've had some classes with us and you're familiar enough to do them, but you just don't know. You just, you know, don't have that quality control afterwards. And perhaps another thing that I'm not sure if we can plug in a video of our top tips about how to incorporate exercise or some physical activity in your life, in your daily life. Bronwyn, I'm talking particularly to you. I don't know if we can plug that video onto the chat. But yeah, my colleague Tom Howard did a little video about how we can do little things to be more active at home, now that, you know, even younger people are also sitting around much more. And, you know, for example, one of them is like, every time I need to leave my chair, so before I can leave my chair, I need to do 5 squats or 5 like sit to stand, let's say, to just incorporate a little bit of strength training in there. So hopefully Brom, she can find that video on YouTube and put it on the chat. But I think probably we can wrap it up here, Jenna, and maybe open up to our lovely audience that have been very well behaved background, and we can open up to questions. So
I'll just post the links in the chat as well for the review and the CMO's guidelines.
Yeah, that'll be great as well, so people can read those at their own leisure. Bronwyn, again, looking at you, maybe we can close the presentation, and then I can see the people, and hopefully they can raise their hand, and we can, pass the virtual microphone to you, so you can ask different questions. Again, remember we're recording, so if you have a question but you don't want to appear on the video, just remember to turn your video off before you ask the question. But I'll flick through. I have a lot of people. This is so exciting. Do we have any questions? Anybody's got anything to add? Now we've gone really. I like, Richard, how you've been standing, I think, through the whole webinar, being active.
If you're unsure on how to unmute, also feel free to put any questions in the chat box. I'll fire them across to Lorraine and Jenna that way as well.
So Gemma, so it's okay. So it wasn't. Yes, right. I have been standing and keeping going through the presentation. So perhaps it's not a question, but it was just on the screen that you had. Obviously, it's been being active, strength, and you're looking at balance coordination. But I think the one that maybe we also needed to focus on was a little bit about minimizing inactivity. And I know obviously we talked about that. That is obviously something that we focus on when we've got the senior groups coming to the McLaren Centre, is that we talk about not just coming to the centre to be physically, to be active and do their session, but when they go away, not just sitting down and trying to keep on the move, getting up and moving about as often as they possibly can.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the key, because I think a lot of people, when you get told to exercise, or if you're following certain guidelines, you'll think, right, I'll do my little bit of exercise and that's it. I can go and sit in front of the TV now for the next 6 hours and it's absolutely fine. But in reality, like you just said, we need to try and avoid that physical inactivity. So that is something to promote as well amongst that kind of demographic. And I suppose that's where those incorporating exercise into just everyday activities comes into things, because just simple things like while you've put the kettle on, try and do some sit to stands, or try and do some calf raises, or try standing on one leg holding onto your kitchen counter, that type of thing. Just while you're performing those everyday tasks that you do without thinking, just try and add in that little extra bit of movement, and it should hopefully look to promote that physical activity a bit more.
Yeah, good point, Richard. I think Bronwyn has already plugged the YouTube video in it. But again, that could apply to any of us, really, because not because I exercise for 30 minutes or even an hour a day, if I spend the rest of the 23 either lay down, sleeping, or actually sat down when I'm working. I think that there should be some research coming up that says that actually is not enough. You just need to increase that sort of like activity levels throughout the day.
You become the active couch potato, I think, is the
active couch potato. There we go.
Yeah, so yeah. I mean, you obviously get some benefits from doing the physical activity, but it shouldn't just stop there. It's, be active, do your exercise, but then try and be active in between times as well. Hence the fact that I stood up and I have been doing my exercises whilst the video's been on.
I did notice, Richard. So, but again, the video that on YouTube is aimed for older adults and is all things around the house. But equally, top tips could be if you get the public transport to go to work, is like jumping off a station early or a bus stop early. It could be parking in the furthest space of the car park. It could be into the furthest away toilet when you're breaking in the office. I mean, the furthest away toilet in your house probably is not that far away. But it's about like thinking all those bits and bobs that I'm gonna increase that, or before I have lunch, I'm gonna do like a lap around the block or something like that. I think
that's part of when you do the exercises, particularly if you add sheets or maybe in the chat at the end of the sessions, is it's also part slightly, maybe not education but re-education, but just getting these points, reminding people that if they take the bus instead of the car, walk if they can, blah, blah. Just to try and re-emphasize about being physically active, and don't just think of being active as being exercise, to look at the opportunity to be active throughout the rest of the day as well.
Yeah, and again, particularly maybe going into winter where daylight is going to be reduced, you can already start noticing, and you are more, you know, encouraged that maybe you just need to, like, you know, lay down on the sofa once it becomes dark. So, you know, how can we create that habit on those, you know, recommendations or in that chat after the exercise to then keep that going through the winter months? Because
it's almost about trying to create your environment that you live in and see it as being a place for being physically active. So it's kind of encouraging development to put things around you and to make where you are, particularly now we're in this situation with the lockdown, etc., or have been, is to look at how you can make your environment as friendly for being active as possible. So if it needs moving the furniture around a little bit to make sure you can do some physical activity at home, just, you know, all those sort of points to try and make your environment as conducive to physical activity as possible.
That's it. That's correct.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't know. I don't think we flashed anything on the chat. Any other questions?
I've just seen someone wave.
Oh, who's waving?
I can't see a name. Why isn't my... Sorry, my laptop's playing up a little bit. Sorry.
Who's waving? Is somebody? Is Teresa waving? Or you are muted, or we can't hear you actually?
No, she's unmuted.
Oh, so maybe a problem with the microphone. We can see your lips moving.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious. I'm involved in a walking group, and quite a number of the people are older, and some of them coming on to their early 80s. Have you had much experience of how having injuries through doing exercise has had an impact on people, and the sort of psychological impact of them not being able to exercise when they're used to doing it? Because we find that we get people, you know, they'll get a knee problem, they can't walk, then that it sort of gets worse and worse. You know, they can't take exercise, and then they're isolated from other people. So have you got any sort of research on that as well?
So personally, I've had kind of experience of that quite a bit within my sessions, like throughout, well, back when everything was normal, as well as within these times as well. Personally, what I've done when it's kind of been in that scenario is I've really tried to, again, going back to what Richard was just saying, really tried to emphasize just trying to incorporate a little bit of activity within their everyday life. If they've, for example, if they're having knee issues, can they just do some seated stretches? That type of thing, and checking in on them, really trying to kind of promote the health benefits of the exercise, just carrying on doing that little exercise at home, but also, like I said, when we were just within that talk, checking in on your participants, so giving them that call once a week if that's what they need, just to see how they're doing, just to encourage them to get moving a little bit. What we did do within the exercise referral scheme throughout lockdown is they did like a walking challenge. So even people in their houses, they could do a couple of minutes walking, or if they knew the distance of their room, they could walk up and down their room a couple of times, and then they would give us that distance, and everyone's distances of walking would get put together, and they all completed a challenge of like walking the length of Wales or something like that, I think it was in the end. So just kind of having little challenges for your groups to do, and kind of keeping them updated. So I suppose having that check-in point as well, because I think it is inevitable that when we're working with this demographic that you are going to experience times when people either get injured or they've experienced adverse health conditions that are preventing them from participating in their usual activity, but the likelihood is that they're going to be able to participate in some form of activity, even if it is just standing up out of their chair or sitting in their chair and marching for a minute. Like that, there's always going to be some form of movement that they're going to be able to do, and encouraging that is kind of key, I think.
Yeah, and I think if we go into winter season, and you know, we may have like the usual flu and usual like bugs that they might be indisposed for a couple of days or weeks, let's say, and they fall off that routine. Again, giving those phone calls, I think, as Jenna says, it could be quite important, almost like, you know, to say like, we still remember, like, you know, you used to come here, we know you've been a bit unwell, but you know, you're welcome to come any time back, because it's quite easy to go into the default of like, well, I'm going to preserve myself and maybe not try to do much more because I'm not feeling 100%. But then we just need to like try to encourage them, as long as they're, you know, healthy, to come back and pick up that routine again and get them exercising. And yeah, it is hard as soon as you stop because of injury, illness, etc. I think it's really hard to go back into it. If you have the self-discipline, then you can go. But if you got somebody actually, reminding you and encouraging you, I think that goes a long way as well.
You talked about the net values of certain activities. So one of the things that perhaps you could do is, if somebody had got an injury to the knee, so they're not able to walk, but you can say, right, so okay, walking, you don't have to necessarily talk about it being met. You could use it as you using your RPE. But it has, if you're walking at a moderate level, then you're going to get a little bit out of breath. Well, doing something else that doesn't necessarily involve walking or using the knee has the same, it will create the same net value or the RPE. So you just give them some alternatives to the activity they're doing, but tell them they'll get just as much out of doing that as they would do from walking. And then when the knee's better, they can slowly progress back into what they're doing before. So just maybe encourage them to do something else that will have the same benefit.
Yeah, great points there, Richard, as well.
Jenna, I think this one's probably more for you. It's a question from Steve in the chat, essentially saying that we know there's sort of advice and guidance to indicate that generally individuals from sort of lower socioeconomic groups are the furthest from physical activity and an active lifestyle. Would you say that research, or is there research to indicate that that's consistent as we move to older adults as well?
So my research tends to be focused more around falls prevention schemes and biomechanical fall risk factors. And then my work outside of that tends to be more to do with physical activity and exercise within older adults. So I haven't actually looked into the research of that as such. But that is something. So for example, we're running, we're going to be running a service evaluation shortly on a virtual falls prevention clinic that we've got set up in Cardiff. And one of the big things that we're going to be looking at there is going to be looking at any health inequalities that we see between the groups. And those falls clinics are aimed at older adults. It is pitched at age 65 plus. So we're hoping that we kind of see some kind of pattern and trend come out of that. There might already be something there. That's not something we've looked into too much as of yet, because the service evaluation is kind of just still in the preparatory phase. Hopefully we can kind of get a little bit more of a bigger picture. I would personally, obviously this isn't research based, I'd be very surprised if we didn't see health inequalities, because if we see it through the rest of the spectrum in terms of the ages, I'd be very surprised if we didn't see it within that older demographic as well. But I suppose the research will tell us. I will have a look, and I will kind of get in touch with Loraya with any information I do find. So if anyone, if you want to send it out to anyone, then you can afterwards.
Yeah. I guess if we look back to that example of somebody that was doing walking and now because of, let's say, knee pain cannot do the walk, and we think of an alternative, as Richard pointed out, if that alternative, for example, is a not weight-bearing exercise, could be going for a swim or cycle. Again, it will depend on the financial capabilities that people have to actually pay for a swimming lesson or a swimming pass, and having available a bike for that case. Because walking, it could be a walking group that is going for free, so then I'm being active in that way. As soon as I get some sort of sort of modification to that exercise, I might not be able to access that because of my social economic group that I belong. So it would be interesting to maybe look into the capacity that some older adults have to access exercise, depending if it's an exercise class that I need to pay £5 to do some yoga, or something else that I can join in virtually through one of your Facebook lives or anything like that. That there might be some differences in there, I guess. Well, that's great. I think we're just nearly going for around 50 minutes of discussion this morning. So really appreciate it, you all tuning in. Give it a couple more minutes if there are any other questions. But if not, Bronwyn, I think we'll be pretty sure to wrap this up. Any more?
Sorry, I was just on mute.
Hold on.
Yeah, do we have a programme of other activities taking place today? I'm just going to post a link in the chat box to the next free webinar, the Living Well in Later Life. Lorraine, did you want to explain a little bit around what the content of that is going to be?
I can do that without giving any spoiler alerts. ICOPE is the integrated care for all the people in Worcestershire. Is like a body within, let's say, public health. And they have a department or a division within that body that is called Positive Aging, where they're running this project called Living Well in Later Life in Worcestershire. They started in mid-pandemic on the 1st of April. So even though the people running it, they are known in the network of, Worcestershire in older adult physical activity. I don't think we actually have met them, I say on the flesh with them. So they're going to explain a little bit what the project is about. It's a 3-year project. Mainly, some of the things that we are talking about is resistant band exercise program pilots that they're looking into running. And also they're going to talk about this application on your phone or on your tablet that you can download or on a browser that is called the LifeCoach app, which if you answer a few questions, you will get almost like in which step of health decline or functional decline you are, and then they will give you some advice as to how you can slow down that process or maybe improve and go on the step above that. So again, everything is quite in trial mode because that app can be quite personalized and quite localized information about what's up in Worcestershire. So it's not actually that they give you some advice and you can do this course that is in London. It could be quite localized, as in if we put all the, perhaps Richard, some of your sessions in the McClellan Centre or some of our strong and steady classes in Worcestershire, we can signpost to something that is near you based on your postcode. So hopefully make that doorstep delivery or very, very easy access of exercise advice, etc. So that's later on at 3:30. And again, we hear from Sophie Price and Olivia Toy about that project. And again, join in and ask questions and volunteer to be in the pilot, anything like that. It'll be very, very welcome. So I hope to see you all, or most of you, later on.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Jenna, for joining us from lockdown Cardiff.
Thank you. Thanks,
hopefully
everyone.
we can, luckily they haven't put a lockdown on virtual delivery.
Very true.
But again, hopefully we can catch up soon about that evaluation and maybe looking into some of the research. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining us and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think we are the in-house people now here.
Yeah.
Hey, Lynn. I mean, I think you are the Lynn that I know.
Hello. Hi.
Yes, you are the Lynn that I know.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Jenna.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. And Tom Howard, Tom is my colleague, Jenna. Tom is the one.
There we go.
About, did you get old because you stop exercising, or do you stop exercising because you get old?
I really like that. I'm going to carry on using that.
Yeah, yeah, so we were...
It's copyrighted now, I'm afraid.
I wasn't sure, Tom, if you were going to be there to reply to that, or you had us in the background as you were doing other things.
You were on in the background, but I was keen listening. I've actually